Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
Hello and welcome to the Money Factor. We'll cover some of the basics, but we'll also look at strategies for the current economic climate. My guest is Robert L. Wolff. He's an attorney and financial planner, and he's got years of experience dealing with IRAs. Welcome to the show, Bob.
Well, welcome, Richard. I'm happy to be on the show. And so let me ask you, the money factor, does that mean some money might rub off on me today?
I hope so. We hope that for everyone, right?
Yes.
Well, IRAs is a way that maybe it doesn't just rub off on you, but it's a way to invest something periodically to get to where we want to be, obviously. Why did they start IRAs?
Well, they started off in 1974, and at that time they were a minor player in the retirement area, and they're mainly designed for sole proprietors or individuals that were working that were not part of a corporate or company plan, like a 401k, or going back then it was more pension, and other plans. But it was a means for individuals to start saving for their retirement. Over the years, they were a minor player because for a long, long time, the contribution limit was $2,000. Now it's getting up much higher. Basically, 2008 was, last year I should say, it was $5,000 plus $1,000 catch up if you're over age 50. So they become a significant means of accumulating money for retirement.
So let's go into a little bit about the IRA then. What is it?
Well, what it is, it's a little, I like to think of it as a little box. It's a tax shelter box. And why it's useful for taxpayers, I can take pre-tax money, put it in my little box, and it's going to grow tax deferred. So let's put some numbers on. Let's say I invest $10,000 and I'm in a great market and I get 10%. Let's say I start off, you're going to give me $10,000.
Sure.
And I'm a 3% tax bracket. And I have a choice. I can put it in my little box over here, or I can accept it. Now, if I put it all in the box, I'm investing $10,000. If I pay tax and invest it over here, I'm only investing $7,000. So now I get my 10%. My little box produces $1,000 of income. My other box over here will produce $700 less the tax. So we begin to get how it begin to grow.
I think we see where we're going.
Right. So the IRA allows us to invest pre-tax money to grow pre-tax, and we will not pay tax on it until we take the money out. So it's a great way to save for retirement.
So that's the general principle.
Absolutely.
There are a couple of different types of IRAs, and I guess people also have a few other choices in their life about how they want to invest for their retirement, and even if they will invest for their retirement. Let's start, though, with the IRA type. What are the basic types of IRAs?
Well, they keep multiplying. Initially, we had the traditional IRA. Then they have now the Roth IRA, the SEP IRA, and a simple IRA. Reverse order. The simple IRA is for small companies, and it's a real inexpensive way of setting up a retirement plan that's very similar to a 401k without the expense. The employee can contribute money to it, and if the employer wants, they can do a matching contribution. This SEP IRA is really good for a solely employed individual. Is that I can put higher amounts of money into it. I can set more money aside. The only drawback to it, if you have employees, you got to contribute 25% of their salary.
So that's just set.
Yeah, that's a SEP. So most small businesses will lean toward doing the simple IRA if they have employees.
Okay.
The traditional IRA, which you discussed, you put your money in, and when you take the money out, you pay tax on it. The Roth IRA, you pay tax on the money before you put it in, but when the money comes out to you, it's tax-free, as long as it's what we call a qualified distribution.
And we want to talk about that a lot more later after we finish a little more of the basics, the two and how you might work back and forth. What are the advantages, other than the tax, of the different types?
Again, it depends upon your situation. I think again, for small businesses, I think the simple is something people really should look at. Again, if you're just singly employed, no employees, you might want to look at the SEP. Could have different advantages. The big advantage of all of them, except for the Roth, well, even the Roth, is tax deferred. I mean, think of a tax shelter. I'm able to put my money in. I'm going to pay tax on it until I take the money out. The only caveat onto it, the government wants you to do that. So if you take money out before 50 and a half, unless you fall within exceptions, such as one will be death. We talk about the stretch IRA, but like disability is a big one. And there's several other exceptions. There's a 10% early withdrawal penalty. From 59 and a half to 70 and a half, they don't care what you do with the money.
Okay, you can take it all out.
You can leave it there. You can take it a little bit out, and so and most people leave it there because they don't want to pay tax on it. At 70 and a half, you've got to start taking minimum distributions. And there's a couple of minor exceptions to that. And one is if I'm in a 401k and I'm working at the company and I'm not a 5% owner or more, then I can defer my distributions. But for most of us, we got to start taking our minimum distributions by 70 and a half. And this is a lot of the planning coming in to realize we have to take it, and it's ordinary income. And if we don't take it, there's a 50% penalty.
That's huge.
Yes. It gets really huge. First, 50 cents is enough to make you get wide-eyed and bushy tail when you're looking at it. But you think about it. Let's say I didn't take my distribution for last year, and I realize I got to take it this year. So I take my last year's distribution, and this year, and I have to pay the 50% penalty plus the income tax on that. Plus, I have my distribution this year, which is driving my income tax up to a higher rate. So when you begin to look at it, it's not a good move.
It's not a place to make a mistake.
No, you're not willing to make a mistake. It's one of those oops. That's very, very expensive.
Right. A Roth IRA and a traditional IRA. Can anybody do either one, or are there restrictions?
Yes. Basically, they're available. The first criteria is that you have to have earned income. The restrictions will predominantly be if you're in, for both, if you're covered by a qualified plan after a certain amount of income.
So if you have a 401k at work or a pension?
If your income is too high, your contribution, then you cannot put into either a Roth or a traditional IRA. So there are income limits on both, particularly on the Roth IRA. But one thing that becomes more appealing is, notwithstanding those limitations, you can still do a non-deductible IRA up to the income, the contribution limit. And
so no matter how much you make, you can do the traditional?
No. The traditional and the Roth have certain limitations tied into if I'm covered by a pension plan, and particularly Roth if my income is too high.
Okay.
But let's say I want to make a contribution. I can still make, let's say I'm 55 years old, and I want to make a contribution. I can still put my $6,000 into a non-deductible IRA.
Okay.
I do not get a deduction for it, and the income will grow tax deferred, but I'll pay income tax on the income, but not on my contribution. But what's interesting about that, in 2010, they're taking the cap off. There's a $100,000 limitation if you're doing a conversion.
2010.
Right, from conversion to a Roth IRA. So if somebody wanted to sock a little bit more money aside so they can put it into the Roth IRA, the only extra expense they'll pick up was the income earned from during 2009 when they convert into the 2010, assuming that stays in the law.
Okay.
I think that's going to stay. What's interesting, if you do the conversion in 2010, you do not pay your income tax on that until 2011 and 2012. They give you a year holiday, and I don't know. I have the feeling that may not happen, but I do think they're going to take the conversion cap off.
Now, you mentioned when we were talking yesterday, or perhaps it was last week, that there are some interesting dynamics today based on the fact that many people's stock values are much lower than they were a year ago. They've taken tremendous losses in their portfolios, and there's a possibility to convert now to a Roth. And is that a good thing for them to do? Well,
it's something they need to look at. It goes two ways. In fact, I deal quite a bit with tax law, and this is one of the most favorable pro-taxpayer provisions in the code. There's another one, if you're doing a state tax return, that's quite favorable. You can use a value date of death or 6 months later. But how it works, let's say in February of 2008, converted my traditional IRA to a Roth IRA. And let's say my account balance is $100,000. Now my account balance is down to, let's say, 60, 40%.
Yeah, that's not even nearly as bad as we've heard.
Oh, well, let's say 30. Let's be more positive. We're okay.
Okay.
For numbers. So we're down, 30%. If I do nothing on April 15th, I'm going to pay income tax on the $100,000. So let's assume I'm in a 30% tax bracket. So that's what would that be? 30,000.
Right.
I would pay on doing the conversion, but my account is down 30,000. No, my number's wrong, Richard. I'm a lousy mathematician.
Well, no, it was down.
Yeah,
to
I'm
70.
right. Yeah.
You're right.
I'm down, so I'm going to be paying tax. But if you step back and look at it, I'm paying tax on $30,000 that's not there, or roughly $9,000. So in addition to having a loss of $30,000, I have this additional tax. So you're driving me my account down almost 40%. However, the good news is that I can recharacterize. I can just take whatever's left in my Roth plus any income, which wouldn't be any in this case, and just simply give it back to my traditional IRA. And it's like it never happened.
Ah.
And if I've already paid my income tax, I get a tax refund, based on. And I have until April 15th of 2009 to do that. On the other side, with the market being down so low, stocks, I think, and securities are on sale right now, and I think taxes are on sale. I mean, my black little legal heart tells me I don't think income taxes are going to go any lower. I think they're going to go up. So in other words, we have a situation where stocks are low, taxes are low. If I'm thinking about doing a Roth IRA, now may be the time to do it, do the conversion. And again, let's say I'm optimistic, I think the market may stabilize and go up, and I'm wrong, and come, let's say October of 2010, I guess give it back like it never happened. No foul, no gain.
That's unusual.
It is. I mean, it's a useful provision for people.
Do-over.
It's a do-over. Yeah. It's a that's what I call it. It's a do-over. I mean, I can do it over. I mean, in other words, if I'm wrong, I can put it back. So if somebody is really thinking about doing a Roth IRA, I think now is the time to do it, because if you're wrong in the market and it falls out of bed even further, I just put it back and I avoid paying that tax. But if I'm right, and I get it in my Roth IRA, and let's say we do have another bull market, and I'm pretty certain sooner or later, I have no idea, maybe later than sooner, we're going to have another bull market. All those gains are inside my Roth IRA, and when and if I want to take that money out, it's going to come out income tax free.
So in that case, if you had money in a Roth IRA and you wanted to, and you were at 72, you can really plan when that money comes out, because you could take it all out and you would have no penalty.
Right. Once it's after, it needs to be in 5 years.
In fact, reinvest it in something else.
Well, you probably want to leave it in. I don't think you want to take. Well, one thing.
I mean, if you had to, if you were to the point where you had to take a distribution, would that help you with that?
Well, there is no required minimum distribution of Roth IRA.
Ah, okay.
And that's another reason many seniors start take a serious look at it. Is that unlike a traditional IRA, I do not have to start taking my required minimum distributions once I turn 70 and a half. With a Roth IRA, I can leave it there forever. And therefore, it becomes a great item to leave to your heirs. I kind of, from a planning standpoint, and myself included, I kind of look at my regular IRA is what I'm going to live off during retirement.
Okay, so that you will take your distributions.
Right. And my Roth IRA, I'm going to leave there and just let grow tax deferred.
And it's there if you need it.
If I need it, I'll tap it. If I don't need it, I won't tap it.
Perfect.
And if I don't leave it, well, then I leave a tax shelter to heir, and hope they say, hey, Grandpa was a smart dude.
Right, and you'll have a lot of very friendly and polite grandchildren.
Yeah, you're right. Well, of course, if I'm gone, it won't make any difference. But,
well, that's true.
Yeah, but it is a terrific planning tool, as you understand it. But again, I think the situation that we're in at some point, historically, if you go back and we were talking about the stock market is doing what it has always done. It goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down. This time we were down a little more than we were anticipating. I mean, if you look at historically, but it's doing what the market normally does.
Are there any disadvantages to IRAs?
Well, the only for retirement income, no. If you're looking at from an investment, the only advantage or maybe disadvantage to an IRA, not a Roth IRA, but a traditional IRA or the STEP or the simple, is that if you die, the assets held within the IRA do not get stepped up in basis. So if I had $100,000 in mutual funds outside and my basis was $50,000.
Now, what is a basis?
Tax basis.
Okay.
So if I were to sell the mutual fund, I would pay $50,000 in capital gain, or if I had $100,000 of the same mutual fund inside the IRA, the traditional IRA, that will all come out as ordinary income.
Uh-huh.
But if I die with the mutual funds outside in my estate, I get a stepped up in basis equal to $100,000. So if my heirs sell it, they'll pay no capital gain. So that's from a planning standpoint. But I think by far, when you look at the benefits with IRAs for some of your money, it far outweighs that consideration.
So basically, we all need to live after retirement, and unless we're planning to work until we die. And we all need money to do that. And it makes sense to save it in a way where you don't pay taxes and it increases as fast as you can.
There's nothing about tax-deferred compound interest growth and also leaving it to somebody. I think the other thing, because I deal a lot with senior citizens, and what's really struck me is that when Social Security was passed, the average age was 68. Today, for a male, it's 82. For a female, it's 85. But in a couple, it's highly probable for somebody to live into the 90s. And I can attest that in my family, is that the vast majority of my family members have lived well into the 90s, and the ones who didn't make it were touching distance. I mean,
right.
They were there. In fact, they had expired back a number of years ago, and with today's medical technology, they would probably have lived much longer. Except, the medical progress has been fantastic. So I think when we're talking about retirement, we need a long horizon, to look at, down the road a long ways, because we may be going down that road for a long time.
Right.
And that's where the retirement accounts come in, because that growth factor is going to grow a lot faster inside a tax-deferred vehicle than outside.
It seems to me that the difficulty for a younger person, I know I was there once too, is seeing yourself in the future. Let's say you're 25. And how do you worry so much about when you're 65 or 72 now? So how do you get people started saving when they're young so that it really piles up?
That's a tough question. I'm with you. I can remember a period of time in my life when people are talking about things happened 20, 30, 35 years ago. Like, how can I remember things like that? Recently I got together with some of my college friends, and we're talking about things that happened 25, 30, 35 years ago, like it was yesterday. I think it's just education, and stressing the need to save or to start something.
Well, maybe images of people. Do you have any examples of people who aren't doing well and that are doing well? There's the old story of the aunt who saved and the one that didn't.
Yeah, unfortunately, I run into that, in my practice. It's really pathetic sometimes with various aspects. I just had a conversation with a lady. There's really not much to do, but they didn't have any advice. Husband took early retirement from the state. He took a pension, full pension, no co-pension for his wife. And of course, he retired at 62. And also, at that age, you lose 25% of your Social Security. Wife retired at age 62, so she lost 25% of her Social Security, and she had a small pension. The husband was healthy, but due to died about a year or so after he died, and all of a sudden she finds herself virtually destitute without planning.
So something like 30% of the income that she'd had a couple years before.
Well, what they should have done in that situation, I mean, they lost his Social Security would have been substantially higher every way. I don't want to get to Social Security. It's from a planning, standpoint. So I think, at least I'm always pounding on younger people, start saving money now, because someday you're going to be old like me.
Well, I think that is the biggest motivation. If you know someone, or you can empathize with someone who didn't save, and now all they can do is sit and worry about how they're going to keep the heat on, even though you could have started a long time ago. Now, let's say you are 25. Any rule of thumb today of how much somebody should save?
I don't have a really rule of thumb. They got different rules of thumb, like the percentage of your income and et cetera. I think is what reasonably you could set aside for planning. Because the problem at that age, particularly if you get married, you have children, you have other aspects. I mean, theoretically, it's great to do a lot of planning, but from a pragmatic standpoint,
it's hard.
It's hard. But I think if you can start some savings and get in the habit of setting money aside, that habit begins to build on itself, and eventually, as some of the other expenses begin to ebb, you're able to put more money in. The other thing to do, if I'm with an employer and they have a 401k and they're matching, is put the money in, because that's free money, and try to sock as much money, away as possible.
Okay.
But in other words, like I have formulas I can use, but the practical aspect is that what can you do? But also, even if you can do very little, is start saving gradually, because once you get in the habit of saving,
And if you take part of your increases in salary rather than trying to come up with a part of what you were spending, it's probably easier.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, before you see the money
right.
coming, you start setting it aside. But what I find is if you get in the habit of doing it, and as you see your account begins to grow, then you're inclined to do it, because you're also maturing and you're growing older. And coming back, I guess somebody saved this is not much saving, but I'm not a smoker, and one of my buddies, neither of us spoke, and my son started smoking cigarettes. He just started. But I was with a third buddy who does it all, and he's a heavy smoker, and so my son was there, and he lit up, and I said, whoa, wait a minute. I said, look at my age. When you get to my age, you want to look like myself and Sal, or do you want to look like Doug? He stopped smoking. I mean, because Doug.
Right.
And I think sometimes, if you could draw an example, if you set some money aside, you're going to have a better retirement. If you don't set it aside, you're not. Particularly also for younger people, I would be concerned about Social Security benefits being there. Like for you and I, Richard, I think we're okay.
Right.
But I think the younger people.
If you look 40 years down the road, the crystal ball is very murky.
Yeah, I would be concerned, and I'd be trying to save as much money as possible in a program. And also the government would, and that's why I think they're coming out with some of the different IRAs and other like the simplified 401k to encourage people to take their money to set aside for them to save for their retirement.
So you said a second ago that the 401k, if you're getting matching money from your employer, that's where you want to put whatever you can afford.
Absolutely.
As opposed to an IRA. But if you do either not have that, or you have other money that you want to invest, and you're not at retirement age, let's say you're 20, 30, even 40, are there advantages and disadvantages to whether you go the Roth or the traditional?
Statistically, the calculations with the Roth and the traditional IRA, if tax rates don't change, if the income rate, everything stays equal, they're kind of designed after tax to produce roughly the same result, which is odd. I mean, in other words, the government is saying, well, if nothing changes, of course, what happens, things aren't going to do that. They're going to move.
But you have to base your choice on
right.
Probably a steady state, because you don't know.
Okay. So I lean, which many people would disagree with me, but I lean toward a younger person, if they have taxable income, to do the traditional IRA. If they don't have high taxable income, then to do the Roth IRA. but put more money to work for you, because if I do the Roth, I've already paid tax. So in essence, I have less money working for me. With the traditional, it comes off the top, so I have more money working for me. But you have to look at your tax bracket. I mean, if you're in a low tax bracket, then I lean toward the Roth. If you're in a higher tax bracket, so it's going to stimulate a reasonable tax savings. For example, let's say you're in a 20% tax, bracket, and I made a contribution.
And that would be your personal income is what, about 40,000?
Maybe in that range. I don't do income tax returns. I'm always until I do my own. I haven't sat down and do it. I don't look at the the rates going in. But hypothetically, let's just say let's say they combine state and federal with 30%. And if I put $5,000 in a traditional IRA, I've saved $1,500. So if it's inside that money's working for me. So that $1,500 is going to grow over a long period of time, and you can calculate it out if you use a reasonable rate of return. But again, I lean toward, if you have high taxable income, going for the deduction, lower taxable income, going for the Roth.
So you want to see if you can get a deduction. Now, if you have really high income, is your Roth going to be there for you? Can you actually put money into a Roth
No.
if you're?
If you get a $150,000 range, then the Roth you're being phased out, with the Roth IRA. So then you're, and of course, if you're covered under an employment program, you may not be able to do the regular IRA, also. The other thing to keep in mind too, if you have a spouse, and if your spouse, as long as you have earned income, you can set up an IRA for your spouse also. So if your spouse was not working or low income, you might be able to do a.
Even though your family income is high?
Yeah, we have. I don't have a little cheat sheet.
Right.
You have to look at it, but many times there's a high probability for a person that can also set money aside, for their spouse.
So you should look at that.
Yes.
Any changes you're seeing, or that either are new for 2008 or looking ahead to 2009 in terms of IRAs? And you mentioned 2010 as an important date.
Well, the changes are just absolutely rampant. I went to 2 programs, one in August, and I went to another program in November, and some of the material in August was already outdated. And by the time I really got home with the November program, some of that was outdated. Well, for example, for 2009, a big change is that required minimum distribution has been suspended for 2009. So if I'm over 70 and a half and I have to take a required minimum distribution, I don't have to take for 2009. I can leave the money there, and that's because the market is so down. Now,
And is that the reason they put that in?
Yes, because it's leaving the investment there. I mean, if your market was down 20% and you took a 5% withdrawal, it's got to recover 33.3%. If you left it there, it's only got to recover 25%. There's you calculate it out. So I mean, from that standpoint, so for 2009, you do not have to take your required minimum distribution. Now, there's a couple of traps. One is that if you turned 70 and a half in 2008 and was waiting to take your first distribution before April 1st of 2009, you still got to take that.
Okay.
Another one, if you're over 70 and a half, you can make a direct contribution from your IRA to a charity up to $100,000. So if you're charitably inclined and you want to make a contribution, you can do it directly from the IRA to the charity, which is very advantageous from a tax.
Okay, and so that would be your required minimum distribution.
Correct. It counts toward it, but it's not coming into your tax bracket.
Right. So
but of course, you haven't got to take required minimum distribution in 2009, so you can still.
But that might be something to think about, rather than writing that out of your checkbook, if that is something that would help.
Correct, because you're taking ordinary income and you're not picking up as tax. You're not picking up the deduction. It's going directly into the charity.
Okay.
Again, as I mentioned in 2008, there's currently, if you want to convert to a Roth IRA, there's a $100,000 cap. It's a family cap income. But in 2010, that cap goes away, so you can make a large conversion. And then there's all kinds of rulings. I mean, it's been, if keeping your mind active avoids Alzheimer's, I've got it made. Like when it gets coming, it's getting, there's so many changes, it's almost hard to follow. For example, let's say I inherit, or another big one is an inherited 401k. In 2006, they passed legislation that if a non-spouse inherits a 401k, they could roll it over into an inherited IRA. Problem is that most 401ks will not allow you to do that.
Ah.
Now they're making it mandatory in 2010. If I inherit a 401k from, say, my father, I could roll that over into an inherited IRA, and then I can do the stretched out IRA. So that was great. But then they came out with another ruling about the same thing, saying, somebody asked, well, suppose I want to convert to a Roth IRA. And the answer, yeah, if you're inheriting from a 401k, since you can roll, it's not really a rollover, but we refer to a inherited IRA, you can convert at the same time and pay your income tax, but now you got a Roth IRA. However, if you inherit a IRA, let's say for my father, a regular IRA, not the 401k, I can't roll that over into a Roth IRA. So there's always some problem because you think, well, if this works here, this should work, over there. But that was a very, beneficial, because only a spouse can roll over a 401k or an IRA. So for many years, the problem is that a child would inherit a 401k, and they were typically stuck with maybe a lump sum distribution or the benefit being paid out over 5 years. All depends upon what the plan stated, because it's one of those situations where the revenue code is much more liberal than the typical 401 plan. So that's from a planning standpoint, that's a major, breakthrough.
Advantage for the IRA.
For many people.
We're almost out of time. I just want to ask one more, and then if there's something I skipped, feel free. Do you see people making mistakes with their IRAs, and what is the more common mistakes that people make?
Well, I see one big mistake. There's several, in particular in this area, is with their 401k. Is instead of doing a trustee to trustee transfer, they do a rollover. And there's an automatic 20% withholding. Unless they make that money up, that money never gets into the IRA and have to pay tax onto it. Another one, which a little bit, is that there's a concept of net unrealized appreciation. And many people who work for GE, instead of what they should be doing is taking the stock out directly rather than rolling it over into the IRA, because it prevents it from becoming a capital gain. And that comes up, quite a bit. And the other one is simply not understanding some of the, the rules. For example, if you inherit a Roth IRA, you've got to start taking minimum distribution. Even though your predecessor did not have to take minimum distributions, you've got to start taking it by December 31st of the year following death. And there's starting to be, revenue rulings are problems with IRS there, because people think, well, Dad didn't have to take it, that means I don't have to take
it.
And know what I deal with is with trusts, is that many times you want to do a trust to protect the benefit, and you can't, if you want to get a stretched out IRA over a long period of time, you can't roll the IRA into the trust. What the trust is the beneficiary, so the money flows out. It's a minor technical thing, but it's important to pay attention to it, because the difference can be astronomical. For example, let's say I'm an 18-year-old and Grandpa leaves me a $100,000 IRA and it's invested at 8%. That's going to grow to about $2.8 billion. So let's say Grandpa doesn't trust me. So Grandpa puts it into a trust to make sure that money is going to be in the trust for me. I'm not going to spend it prematurely. If we roll it out of the IRA into the trust, then we've lost that stretch. If we don't. And the last one is we have multiple beneficiaries, which is a real problem.
A multiple beneficiary?
One IRA. There's a concept called a separate trust account. But if you name 3-4 people as the beneficiary of one IRA, they're going to use the oldest beneficiary's life expectancy. So the worst case scenario would be, let's say I named 3 of my children plus my college or favorite charity. I have no designated beneficiary, therefore the IRA is going to be pushed out, as though it's going to be, it depends. It's a 5-year rule, but we're going to have a payout. Now I can take care of that if I understand the rules by September 30th of the following year, but it's a big problem in setting it up that somebody wants to benefit the children. They've heard about the stretched out IRA, they want to do it, but they name they put too many people on, or they put an older person on, and it kind of destroys it. And the big one is a non-for-profit, organization.
I want to ask one more question now that you've said all that. There must be times in a person's life where they need advice more than other times. If you're going along for 20 years and you're putting your money in the IRA, you're putting the minimum or the maximum somewhere in between $3,000, $5,000. Maybe that year you don't need advice. But what are the kind of milestones where people could get tripped up and some advice would be useful?
What I'm seeing, and also is around 62, because you're coming into the range where you can start taking Social Security, but also you're in that retirement range. And I'm starting to call it the fragile years of retirement. 5 years before and 5 years after retirement. You cannot afford to take a bad hit, and you need to understand the rules as you're moving from working into retirement. Like one common mistake I see many retirees taking is taking their Social Security at age 62. Now, if you're sick and you need it, that's one thing. But unless you're not, 25% hit. I mean, right off the top, a haircut. Plus, what people don't realize, from 62 to 66, the government guarantees you that your Social Security is going to grow by 7% plus the COLA. From 66 to 70, it's 8% plus the COLA. The COLA this year was 5.8%.
Wow.
Now, where are you going to get that, Richard? You can't find it. But it's something to look at. But also, setting up your investments. I mean, to re-shift yourself. We were talking about asset allocation. And that's really what it is. I mean, at a certain point, you want to become more conservative. I mean, you don't want to become too conservative, but you need to readjust your focus, readjust your...
You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket,
Right,
is one way people have said that.
But you need to restructure. And also, as a lawyer, I mean, you need your power of attorneys and et cetera. Because, again, you're in the range where the possibility or the probability of something happening may happen. I mean, of course, as you go through life, you need wills and so on. But when you get to a certain age, some of this planning, I think, is really important. But I think the important thing is sit down around about 3 years before, 65, now I'll be 66, that 62 mark, and really develop a comprehensive plan going forward, because you are in a changing life period.
I think that sounds like great advice.
Well, at least I'm probably for myself anyway, too.
I want to thank you very much for talking to us about this topic. It's not the simplest thing to understand, even though the basic concepts are simple.
No, it's not. And besides that, they're changing the rules all the time. I mean, you have to really be paying attention. But anyway, thank you for having me on your show, and it's been enjoyable.
Thank you. And I want to thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the show, and you tune in again next time. Until then, take care.
Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.